On the 2nd of January 2022, a 14-year-old kid would decide to buy a silly little monkey game. Never did anyone expect that this decision would leave a massive impact on the chimps community yet to come. To figure out how this happened, we need to rewind to the start of things. The early access for BTD6 was released a bit sooner, but BTD6 was officially released on the 14th of June 2018. Ever since then, I've been consistently following the game by watching all of ISAP's videos between 2018 to 2021 with some other content creators. Only to watch though, never actually buying the game. This will all change on one fateful day, November 30th, 2021. Battles 2's official launch. Since I was still eyeing BTD6 at the time, I was ecstatic to find that it was free to download. That was until...
I am quitting Bloons TD Battles 2 until the next meaningful update comes out. Now for Battles 2. I want to talk about the several problems this game has that has nothing to do with the XP grinding or bug towers that everyone else has been complaining about. Here's my number one problem with the game, is the lag, and it feels bad whether you win or lose.
If you were anywhere near the Battles 2 hemisphere during launch, you'd have seen how much of a shitstorm it was. Horrible meta, horrible progression, and horrible servers. Everyone just assumes that it was rushed to release just before Christmas to rake in Christmas sales. The horrible quality caused by the choice to rush release has caused B2 to never really claw back its initial hype and fanbase, especially after NK left it in a batten down state just before flying away to their holidays. It was frustrating seeing such unique and charmful concepts from B2 being locked behind a horribly balanced abomination, which is why just a bit later, I finally decided to get BTD6. With secondhand knowledge from watching quite a few BTD6 videos, and already knowing that the end goal was expert chimps, I rushed straight to my first challenge editor chimps run, Dark Castle chimps with Sauda, Crossbow Master, and Glaive Lord. The run was done within 24 hours of installing the game, with those 24 hours also including grinding up the XP needed to unlock the used towers, as well as opening up Dark Castle as a map in the first place. There's a first for every expert chimps player, but imagine having your expert run completed within 24 hours of installing the game. Afterwards, I played the game as normal with an emphasis on chimps, grinding monkey money, badges, messing around with all the game modes, second so. Nothing eventful happened until March 22nd, 2022. I don't know who or how, but I was originally given the impression that Index was filled with toxic sweats and so was reluctant to join for 3 months. But after some back and forth, I ended up joining Index, and this is where the expert chimps journey truly began. Just before joining, Expert Chimps had a special little sheet called the Expert Tracker Sheet, noting down which semi to super expensive towers have had a completion on which expert or pseudo-expert map. The tracker back then was much barer, with PMFC and Inferno Ring being the only 2 towers that have gotten all maps completed. Due to that, I was super motivated to help finish up the sheet, and just 6 days after, I finished my first sheet run in the form of xfac chimps with Bloon Incineration, followed by workshop chimps with Bloon Master Alchemist the day after, as well as the discovery of Tatzone on X-Factor used to handle xfac with XXXL trap. Already some expert chimps runs here and there, but nothing spectacular. This, however, will change upon the next update. Version 31, Geraldo's Reign. This was where most of the growth came in. I initially messed around with Geraldo and Bug Carpet of Spikes at the time, but never really delved deep into Gary for a while since he felt a bit too powerful to be fun. Around this era is also what I dubbed my X-Factor phase. I mainly did X-Factor chimps runs ranging from Web Domination, Glaive Lord main DPS, XBM, and Bugless Carpet of Spikes with Psy, also known as Cosine. There were also some other fun runs done at the time, including Axis of Clues with the knowledge of Tax Zone on X Factor. And around that time, I did try my hand at attempting #OutchChimps with Glavelord, but failed quite horribly, which is why I mainly stayed away from the harder expert maps for a while. After some time, as the X Factor fanatic that I was, I decided to abuse version 31 Gary and take off Flying Fortress on X Factor. And quite a bit later, I would also take off Anti-Boon on X Factor during Geraldo's peak, just before he got nerfed. Between those two runs would be the most impactful X Factor run that I had. Such begins the odyssey of Superstorm X Factor. May 22nd, 2022. It was still version 31, and Superstorm X Factor was easily done through the use of Main Moab, Bouncing Bullets, and Etienne, with the first two being especially powerful before nerfs. The run, however, was quite unsatisfying, as it felt like mushing meta towers together and hoping they worked. In the following days, I began practicing with the easier experts, messing around with Sanctuary, Muddy Puddles, and such. It was not until the fateful day of June 11, 2022. After messing around a bit with X Factor save-ups, I decided to try my hand with Double Dark Knights, or DDK for short. I've only really heard that it used to be top tier before Dark Knights lost 2 peers over versions 30 and 31, thinking that they could still potentially be the next Superstorm X Factor. I decided to try it anyways. The first run was a bit unoptimized, having random things such as Jungle Druid, as well as an unnecessary Camel Village. But the run did give me very valuable knowledge, and sticking to my original plan, with the addition of a few optimizations, especially since that 3k could easily be made up with better supporting tower decisions. June 12th, 2022. It was done. The culmination of 6 months of playing the game for an unhealthy amount daily. I'm still extremely fond of this run, even to this day. It is unique, and it is, or at least was, somewhat impressive, and it was, more importantly, such a thrill to get done. I honestly still gush about somehow finding a reason to use Clue Strike in that save up nowadays. But there is still one last event in store that will truly kickstart the Expert Chimps art. July 12th. I was messing around with X Factor as per usual, and found that Stronger Stim and Wall of Fire Arcane Masteries saved up a surprisingly large amount for a joke early game. And with only one mere message, an old tier 5 would resurrect into irrelevancy. What's the funniest thing I can afford? Keep in mind that at this time, people still thought of Elite Defender as a beginner-only tower, so I thought that it would die horribly as soon as it reached a mildly difficult round. And I accidentally did a $65,000 save up with zero pre-thought. The very next day, I went back into the run with a few optimizations and finished up my third X Factor Superstorm with Etienne and a not meta slave option. Experience with Azili, experience with Edev. The combination of the experience between Azili and Elite Defender are the two things that would begin the next arc of the journey. Strap yourselves up because this is the one I love the most. Azili S-. Probably the most memorable and impactful arc of the journey. It begins on August 24th, 2022. I had finally broken out of the X Factor shell and began playing with true experts again, starting with an attempt for a save up with Azili and Elite Defender on Ouch. It originally dead-ended at 54,000, but a second attempt made it save up all the way to the Wizard Lord Phoenix. And I lost to round 99, but we don't talk about that because I didn't have saves back then. So after playing around with that, it was finally time. Moab Domination Quad. As for now, it's probably extremely trivial, but back then, Quad's mid-game was still a complete mystery. The highest non-brick destroyer save-up that I found was Churchill and Double Dark Knights at $55,000 saved up. So when something managed to save up to MDOM, it was a huge deal. Over the 28th and 29th of August, I managed to complete the first ever Geraldo-less Moab domination quad, and that caused me to take a liking towards ezili. The next day, I immediately went to work towards Bez quad. While MDOM quad was thought of as really difficult back then, Bez quad was just a meme. People didn't really think it was possible. There were too many issues between saving up and then beating the late game with Bloon exclusion zone, but anyways, I still decided to try. The save up was done in a day. The late game was also going relatively smoothly. Keep in mind that the save up was half of the reason why people never thought of actually finishing best quad, so this was a huge deal. The late game was then also going quite smoothly until the game crashed and I was unable to open my save. Although the run technically hasn't finished, it can still be thought of as me single-handedly solving quad mid with the previous two save ups actually working towards getting those really expensive towers. Afterwards, I was messing around with expert chimps again, but still on an ezili high, a devious idea popped up. What if she could save up to superstorm on ravine? Once again, this was thought of as fully impossible without Geraldo at the time. This one probably aged the worst, but I still tried anyway. The first attempt began on September 8th, 2022. After staying up for what I admit to be quite an unhealthy duration, the next day the save up worked. But also I had shifted my superstorm position a bit too far left and had to restart from round 6 because it couldn't reach the Moabs on the right side. Later on that day, I redid the run and on an ezili high and still preaching for ezili S- beforehand. This was both the peak of the TD6 journey as well as the peak of the ezili S- arc, resulting in her actually being put in S- on the following tier list. For comparison, this is where pre-nerf Psy and Brickle were at the time. It was unfortunately eventually discovered that ezili was being carried by her synergy with Phoenix rather than carrying her own weight and was brought back down to A tier, but it was still pure and peak comedy gold while it lasted. With Ravine finally being done and Alkin Bloody being done previously by other players, it was time for the final frontier, Quad, where all expensive tier 5 used to rot and die in. A few days later, I finally came up with something. Sex. I'm being 100% serious here. The combination of Spike Storm and Moab Hex, hence the name Sex, can burst down up to 14 BFBs in one strike. Pairing that up with 2 Phoenixes to support Hex uptime and pick off Moabs on its downtime, there was finally hope to get a Superstorm completion on all maps. So on the day after September 10th, I went to work. After spending hours on round 84 alone, I successfully accidentally dead-ended the run by hexing all 4 ZMGs on 87, resulting in having 0 abilities up for 88. And I didn't have saves at the time. What was I thinking? I did eventually come back to doing the run, but was never able to recreate what I needed to do to beat 84, so unfortunately I disbanded the run and Superstorm Quad had to wait for another day. That other run would come soon as the Quada arc will soon begin. Just like Elite Defender, Sauda was originally thought of as a beginner-only tower, which she was since her abilities were nigh useless before her rework. But alas, Quada. It starts with redoing MDOM Quad with Sauda. It would have been much more impactful if this was the first Geraldo-less MDOM Quad, but it's still a run with a severely underpowered hero. So next station, Darkling Axis. Why not leap from barely beating Quad with Bez and an alright hero to beating it with an underpowered hero and $30,000 left over? It was quite a challenge, but without needing a restart because my save didn't crash at the time, I was able to finish the run in 2 days. That run was followed up by yet another run which felt stupendous at the time, Crush Quad. Yet another tier 5 that goes to Rotten Die and Quad because it's Quad. Another BTD6 player would also try Crush Quad at the time with OP Geraldo, and he struggled with Geraldo. So this was surely going to be a challenge. That was when I had the bright idea that I could stim and mentor the Bloon Crush so it can reach all lanes, and then overclock it so it can have a stupendous amount of stun up time. And yet another previously struggled quad run was done in just a few. After that run, I began experimenting with a certain special hero who had also gained notoriety in the expert chimps community in a few short updates. Such begins the final arc of the journey, Adora. For some odd reason, a lot of people decided to post a lot of Moab domination runs on Reddit on the same day. Out of complete coincidence, I also happened to want to do a Moab domination run. Not just any Moab domination run, however. I wanted to add just a little bit extra to the run to make it special. On version 30.0, Moab domination was buffed to cost 54,000 rather than 64.8. That singular buff has caused it to be a very viable T5 as it both has more leniency on its save up and you could afford an extra 10.8k of support after affording it, which is equivalent to 2 presses, 2/3 of a first strike, over a sticky bomb, a sabo, and an M-glue. Yeah, it's a lot. I wanted to rewind that buff as the little extra on top further on, so I needed to find a hero that was both capable of saving up and had a strong late game, especially against DDTs. After some deliberating, Adora was the only hero who could tick off those boxes. Which was surprising because this was before he gained double damage against round 98. After messing around with 2 or 3 Dark Knight pads and Adora for a save up, I managed to reach a solid amount of save up, but it wouldn't be enough for 64k MDOM. So I decided to swap my DK crosspath to 023. And it worked. It was pre-buff as well, so 023 DK had half the single target DPS as 203 rather than 75%. And with that absolute nutjob of an optimization, yet another MDOM completion was done. The next successful Adora run would come in the form of an axis of tax on Ouch. Index was trying to pack up a few tower axes that could get all maps, so I decided to help Taxes with #Ouch. The run took about an hour, and the late game took about 15 minutes. After that major success, I laid my eyes upon an even bigger challenge, Axis of Buccaneers. This was version 32, so it was before Pirate Lord just about tripled in damage, so it was still challenging back then. I gave it a few hours but ended up throwing in the towel, only to wake up to Pirate Lord getting the aforementioned triple damage, as well as Adora getting double fortified damage on the same update. I booted up the old save and round 98 took 3 minutes. After the fortified damage buff, I decided to try to shoot for Ravine LCC with her. The first run was extremely unoptimized, but it was still cheaper than the Geraldo-less LCC, accounting for price nerfs. 7 days later, I would begin working on yet another Adora Ravine run, Axis of Buccaneers, Ravine. Whilst pre-buff Pirate Lord figuratively didn't have a main attack on #Ouch, Pirate Lord at all stages literally does not have one on Ravine. This means that Adora had to get $50,000 stuffed over on Ravine with a forced flagship. This run is the run that took the most amount of full resets, taking 3 full runs total. The first one then ended on 100, barely losing to the bad ZOMG insides. The second one then ended on 100, barely losing to the bad BFB insides. The third one finally succeeded and made it onto the channel. Go watch that. Also, sometime afterwards, Sauda Superstorm happened. Just wanted to point that out because I finished making the script and then realized I haven't talked about that, even though I did talk about the Quada arc, so yeah. After a few months and some other runs, I would embark on my, luckily, last Adoravine journey. Adoravine leased costumes, which would be cheaper than Geraldo. It began on the 2nd of January 2023. Unfortunately, I was already somewhat burnt out by then, so I didn't give it the 10 hours a day treatment I did with the earlier runs I did. And at the end, I gave up one whole month later, as it just wasn't worth it anymore. And Skucha already found a working solution with Shredder rather than double first strike. So I settled with 96,000 spent on Adora Ravine. And that marks the last time I would really try on a BTD6 run. After that whole debacle, I haven't really played TD6 much. I mean, I do play here and there, but I've basically retired from expert chimps, which is a really good thing. I have a lot of things to do. Bloons probably shouldn't be one of them, unless it gets a massive boom and I can make a career out of it, but otherwise, yeah. I'm just gonna play for fun. I might upload a run once in a while, but that once in a while is gonna be the status quo for a long time to go. It's mostly burnout, but it's also caused by the fact that the expert chimps community is fucking dead. And again, it's just that I have things to do now. So, see ya.